It had been more than a week since I had went to the Wallendor estate and talked to Alan Wallendor. Currently, I was at another party, this one held by the Bouchard family. Normally at this point of the night, I'd be pretty busy trying to stick my nose into business and see what contacts I could make, what information I could gather. But I had other things on my mind. After my conversation with Alan Wallengard, I put a whole bunch of extra effort into trying to find or create a spell that would allow me to basically hand off my workload when it came to handling my father's business. I eventually found a solution in a spell that I found in the magical index. It wasn't exactly what I needed, so I had to give it some tweaks. Alter the spell a bit so that it would fit my needs. And unfortunately, that's what's taken most of my time. But with that done, I now have something to handle the business side of things, so I can focus my attention on this problem with Alice and this ridiculous war that I now have to deal with, and all the other problems that just start stacking up. Ugh, I've been thinking about it so hard it makes my head hurt. Alice, of course, is at the party with me, sitting across from me in the table, right now giving me a sour look. She's probably upset that I'm not feeling talkative at the moment. Normally, I would feel some sort of sense of accomplishment after creating a brand new kind of spell. This one mixes a simple stand-in spell meant to create what amounts to a magical puppet. Essentially, it looks like you, however it doesn't actually have any intelligence. Essentially, it's something that you control mentally from a distance. Normally, that would be the extent of its use, but I had the wise idea to cross that spell with a copy consciousness spell that allows you to basically create a copy of your conscious state of mind. Who you are, your feelings, your thoughts, all of it. Normally, this copy is put into something to the effect of a crystal ball and is simply used to answer questions. For example, a boss might create one of these duplicates and place it somewhere that his employees work. That way he can constantly look over their shoulder, and his copy will simply report back to him, crystal ball or not. But I copied that little consciousness into one of those puppet spells. It's a combination that is proving quite effective. A stroke of genius, if you ask me. And yet, in light of events, I don't feel any sense of accomplishment at all. Usually it would make me feel better to achieve something like that. But right now, it seems to have no effect on my feelings whatsoever. The information that Alice's father doled out to me as of yet isn't proving too helpful. I was able to get a bit of knowledge about the basic works of how each faction functions, the hierarchy systems that run it, specific names of individuals in power in those factions, some of the laws and tenets that govern them, and even some of the laws that govern the interactions they have with each other. Unfortunately, I didn't feel like it was really enough information to work with. I asked Alan Wallengar if he could achieve getting some sort of hard copy of their laws in greater detail, as finite as possible. I need to find some sort of gap if I'm going to have a better chance of working my way into the system. Reginald, Alice said, looking at me a bit perturbed. You've had that sour face on all night. What are you so worried about? You're going to win. I believe in you. Don't stress yourself out so much. You'll figure it out. You always do. You know what I think you need? A little bit of space from this party. You're brain always works better when you're away from others. They're just distractions. Come on, let's go find somewhere more private, Alice said as she got up from her seat at the table, grabbed my arm, and started to pull me away from the main party. Maybe I was worrying about this a little too much. Getting my head off of it might help in the end. Sometimes it's good to give your brain a break. I don't know how Alice always seems to figure it out. Me, I mean. She always seems to figure me out. You might think someone with Alice's usual personality quirks wouldn't be that insightful when it came to somebody's emotional state, but Alice seemed to have me down to a science almost. She tended to know when I was frustrated before I did. So, me and Alice began walking away from the party. This one was primarily to the right side of this particular estate. So, by heading towards the back, we were able to get a decent amount of privacy, fairly far away from the rest of the people. Alice found us a nice spot underneath a tree. Alice gently took herself a seat and invited me to join her. I obliged, of course. So, Reginald, have you managed to slip in any combat training? Alice said as I started taking my seat. No, I replied. There's simply been too much going on. It's very frustrating. It feels like every time I start to make some headway, there's some new problem. Besides, you know I'm more of a businessman than a fighter. When all's said and done, I prefer to settle things with words and agreements. Reginald, Alice said, you have to remember, not everybody's going to be open. Lots of people aren't going to want to talk about anything. I know it's not something you like doing, but you're going to have to put some more practice into fighting. Being a magic caster can be very dangerous, Reginald. But if you can get a good stab in the belly, even the best of spellcasters will tend to take a second guess at trying. So remember to keep that practice up. And when all else fails, go for the gut. There's lots of important stuff in there. I couldn't help but chuckle a bit. Maniac or not, the light-hearted way she tends to talk about killing people always seems to tickle my funny bone for some reason. I'm actually starting to wonder if something's wrong with me. Well, thanks for the advice, Alice, I said, rubbing the back of my head, starting to look up at the stars. Alice scooched in a little closer and started leaning on me, putting her head gently on my shoulder. You know, I hope it's still like this when we're older and we get married, Alice said, staring up at the stars. Maybe that's a little bit ahead of our agreement, Alice. We haven't exactly talked about that one yet. I'm pretty sure that's a far way off, I replied, feeling a bit nervous with the line of conversation. Oh, I'm not worried. We'll get there, Regiman. Remember, it's our destiny. That means everything in between then and now is just filler. A bunch of little details, all leading to the happily ever after of us getting married. So I'm not really worried about it. We'll make it. I know we will. Thanks for the vote of confidence, I suppose, I said, looking over at her, leaning on my shoulder, and feeling a bit flustered, actually. But it was nice. Despite everything, Alice always seemed to have faith in me. Even when it looks like I'm losing, Alice seems to always believe that I'll find a way. It's actually very reassuring, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. And for a while, we just sat there like that, leaning against that tree, staring up at the stars. It felt good. Alice leaning against me, holding onto my arm. It was still a bit chilly out, this early in the year, but Alice was warm, and even that warmth was somehow very comforting. Well, isn't this a pretty picture? I heard a voice announce from nearby. I look over to see a boy, about our age, wearing a clean-cut black tuxedo. He didn't look familiar. Alice had almost started falling asleep, but woke up when she heard his voice. She looked over at him, looking a bit upset. Ugh, I was almost asleep. You're bothering us. Go away. Go on, shoot, she said, waving him off with a hand. Oh, and you must be Alice Wallengard. You're as lovely as I'd been led to believe. Yes, I'm sure you'll make a fine wife. For me, that is. Once I take care of the garbage, he said, looking directly at me. Suddenly, the face Alice was making was less annoyed, more angry. And all at once, I realized this must be one of the so-called suitors Alan Wallengard was talking about. Me and Alice stood to our feet, both exceptionally displeased to have our private moment interrupted. I stared daggers at him. With all that ego, you'd think you'd also give somebody you're insulting your name, I said, putting my hands in my pockets and staring him down. Oh, didn't I give you my name? I'm sorry, it's just that I don't usually hand it out to trash. I mean, that's a bit like telling your shoeshine boy your full details. It's simply not necessary. But I suppose Alice will have to know who I am, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Sylvester. Sylvester Givings. It is so lovely to meet you, Alice. I'm sure we'll be getting to know each other quite well, he said, bowing his head. But I'm afraid we're going to have to set some strict standards as to who you associate yourself with. I'll have to start with cleaning up that trash attached to your arm. I'm afraid your time has run out. You see, you are not going to leave this party alive, because the last thing I'm going to accept is some no-account wizard with no legacy, daring to think he can take what's mine. Both Alice and Forever Fortunate belong to me, and you have no claim on them. And once I put you in the ground, you won't be a concern anymore.